day 623 of the Trump administration, a fast-moving day in this drama surrounding the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. Earlier this evening, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell set the first vote on Kavanaugh for 10:30 tomorrow morning. That would put the Senate on a timeline for a final confirmation vote, possibly late Saturday night, but it's complicated, as we will deal with in just a moment. The president talked up his nominee at yet another rally tonight, this time in Rochester, Minnesota.
You see what's going on in Congress right now with one of the most respected people, potentially, hopefully, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. What they're putting him through, and his family is incredible, what they're putting them through.
Back to Washington now. This has been a day of drama and high emotion on Capitol Hill. Public outrage over Kavanaugh erupted in Washington. Inside the Hart Senate office building, the one with the large atrium, that's where they saw the most protesters, the most people taken into custody. They unfurled banners and they staged a sit-in, and again today they tried to corner members of the committee. Listen to this exchange between protesters and Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch.
Why aren't you brave enough to talk to us and exchange it with us? Don't you wave your hand at me. I wave my hand at you.
When you grow up, I'll be like,
when I grow up, we grow up. How dare you talk to women that way? How dare you? That first, how dare you? How dare you? That's right. You just whispered us.
you gotta hold the door, ma'am. You're gonna get arrested.
Not quite the elevator moment with Senator Jeff Flake from late last week. This was all happening exactly 1 week after Brett Kavanaugh and Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the woman who accused him of sexual assault, both testified back-to-back before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The FBI's report on its background investigation into her allegation, as well as that of Deborah Ramirez, her claim that Kavanaugh exposed himself to her at Yale, they were officially released to members of the full Senate today. NBC News has learned that the FBI spoke with 9 people during its inquiry. Lawmakers have been reviewing the one copy of the findings in the Senate's Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, a secure room known in the trade by the acronym SCIF. And right now the focus is on those who are publicly uncommitted to voting for Kavanaugh. They are, must know them by heart by now, Republicans Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Jeff Flake of Arizona, plus one Democrat, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. The other senator on that list until earlier today was Democrat Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota. She announced her decision on live television with a local station back home in her home state.
This isn't a political decision. If this were a political decision for me, I certainly would be deciding this the other way. I can't get up in the morning and look at the life experience that I've had and say yes to Judge Kavanaugh.
So here's where we are. 2 storylines have now emerged following the release of this FBI report on Kavanaugh. First, the Republicans. Top members of the Judiciary Committee walked into a press briefing with reporters today, and while no one wanted to sound like ageism, some couldn't help but do the simple math here. A combined age of 416 years, an average age of 69 years, and as a group today, their tone was one of vindication.
What we know for sure is the FBI report did not corroborate any of the allegations against Judge Kavanaugh.
I feel very good about where this nomination is right now. This person is very well qualified.
No corroboration, no confirmation of any of these outrageous accusations that have been made against him.
Democrats, in the meantime, are calling into question the integrity of this investigation and questioning the White House role in engineering the result in advance.
We had many fears that this was a very limited process. Having received a thorough briefing on the documents, those fears have been realized.
The most notable part of this report is what's not in it. It looks to be a product of an incomplete investigation that was limited, perhaps by the White House.
The Democrats also continue to point to what a very angry Judge Kavanaugh had to say during last week's hearing.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. And as we all know, in the United States political system of the early 2000s, what goes around comes around.
Tonight, in an unusual move, Judge Kavanaugh has written an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. It is called "I Am an Independent, Impartial Judge." And he writes in it, quote, "I was very emotional last Thursday, more so than I have ever been. I might have been too emotional at times. I know that my tone was sharp and I said a few things I should not have said." He goes on to write, "Going forward, you can count on me to be the same kind of judge and person I have been for my entire 28-year legal career, hardworking, even-keeled, open-minded, independent, and dedicated to the Constitution and the public good." The Washington Post opinion page has its own assessment of that same man tonight, advising senators to vote no on this confirmation. The Post says it's the first time it, as an organization, has made this type of recommendation since Robert Bork's failed nomination back in 1987. With all of that established, let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Thursday night, starting with our correspondent on the Hill, Garrett Haake, Robert Costa, national political reporter for the Washington Post, moderator of Washington Week on PBS, and Sabrina Siddiqui's back with us, political reporter for The Guardian. All three of these individuals were on the Hill today covering the chaos surrounding this confirmation. Garrett, I'd like to begin with you. Around mid-evening, we heard a new name might be in play, that a Republican senator from Colorado had been visited, as so many offices have been, by some victims from back home, doing what constituents do, talking to their member of the Senate. This is a huge vote for everybody. But since the evening has gone on, Garrett, I also want to hear about your moment outside Murkowski's office. Since the evening has gone on, it looks to have stabilized.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. So earlier in the evening, there were some rumblings that Cory Gardner, Republican senator from Colorado, might be wavering in his support of Judge Kavanaugh, in part based on conversations he had had with sexual assault survivors who had visited his office. But Gardner's also the chairman of the NRSC, the campaign arm for Republicans running for Senate, defending their Senate seats. He's very much a part of the Republican leadership. And as the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that was probably not quite as much of a waiver as we had thought. His office ultimately put out a statement saying that there was nothing in the FBI background check that has changed his support for Judge Kavanaugh. But as you said, Gardner was far from the only senator being visited by sexual assault survivors today. And I came across a large group of women from Alaska who had been meeting with Senator Lisa Murkowski today in a couple of different groups. Some of these women were sexual assault survivors. Some were not. When I met the last group of them, they had just left her office. They were 18 strong. Maybe 7 or 8 of them were openly in tears as they came out. And they described to me a meeting that was more than an hour long with just the senator and one other aide in the room, in which they described their experience and really pressed Lisa Murkowski to vote no. And they told me that she was very receptive to them, was very respectful to them, and heard them out. And to me, one of the more interesting things about this, Brian, is this was not something that was advertised by Murkowski's office. It wasn't leaked by staff. This was not the kind of meeting that you have to check a box and say you're consulting with constituents. This shows the kind of carefulness that this one particular senator, who is on the fence and in the middle of so many of these controversial issues, is putting into this vote. And I'd have to say, if you're watching one of those 3 Republicans who's perhaps most likely to vote no, it might be Murkowski. She's got a lot of political cover. Her governor doesn't like this nominee. She's heard a lot from her constituents, and she has kept her cards exceptionally close to the vest, as she often does on these issues. She's who I'm watching tomorrow morning.
Robert Costa, let's talk about the op-ed that showed up in the pages of the Wall Street Journal tonight. Nothing about this has been normal. Sure isn't normal to hear from a Supreme Court nominee in an op-ed like this. In this case, Kavanaugh switching to his indoor voice to talk about what he meant to say.
Oh, it's a strategic move by the White House. They know this nomination is on the brink of maybe falling apart as all these moderate Republican senators, even some conservative Republicans, privately voiced concerns to White House counsel Don McGahn and others. And if you're going to the Wall Street Journal editorial page, it used to be edited by Bob Bartley. It's the high church, really, for a lot of these elite conservative lawyers and Republican lawmakers and officials. And they look to that. If you're going there, that means you have a direct message for that block of the Republican Party.
Sabrina, Jerry Ford didn't get to be president for long, but while he was president, he appointed a young, brilliant Chicago jurist named John Paul Stevens, who became a firm member of the liberal wing of the court before his retirement. I'm going to play for you what former Justice Stevens said at a forum in Florida that was scheduled before knowing this was all going to be a thing. We'll talk about it on the other side.
I thought he had definitely the qualifications for to sit on the Supreme Court. The hearings caused me to change my mind. He has demonstrated a potential bias, and that the senators should really pay attention to it.
So, Sabrina, we've mashed up the essence of what he was saying today. He has defended him as a jurist, as a lawyer, but once he saw the behavior, and this is where so many people have hopped off, he changed his mind.
Absolutely. There are two storylines that emerged from last week's hearing, and one was, of course, the circumstances around the alleged sexual assault and having Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony against that of Judge Kavanaugh's. The other was the strikingly partisan tone that Judge Kavanaugh took in his own testimony, and he's, of course, written this op-ed in part, I think, because of the comments from Justice Stevens and others who have raised concerns over the issue of impartiality. Now, it's worth noting that Judge Kavanaugh has cited his emotions during the hearing, but he was reading from a prepared statement. And I think in part that was because last Thursday he was performing for an audience of one, and that was the President of the United States. Tonight, as he's written this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, of course, he is appealing to some of those moderate Republicans who might be on the fence, in part because they are very much concerned as to whether or not he can be seen as a neutral arbiter from the highest bench in this country. And I do think that Justice Stevens might be one of those people who, at the last stage, has prompted some of those lawmakers, Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins, to have more pause. It's important to recall Jeff Flake said at the Atlantic Festival earlier this week in Washington that we cannot have that kind of behavior on the court, that the temperament that Judge Kavanaugh displayed during that hearing, that could not proceed.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.